It's time to dad.
Hey guys, welcome back to Time to Dad. Thank you for joining us tonight. Tonight's special episode number 2. I know we had been promising you guys that we would get some more very focused episodes going, and tonight we are happy to have Nick's wife on here, Madeline, who is a special educator in the state of Virginia. So Madeline, welcome, and we're stoked to have you. Um,
Thank
I
you very much.
guess totally appreciate you being on here. Special education has been in a lot of the dad groups. We see a lot of questions. There's a lot of topics that come out of it, and dads just kind of looking for answers for things. And we had kind of been hunting for a while. So it's awesome that we could finally nail somebody down, and it's awesome that you happen to be the wife of somebody on the show as well. So thank you for being here tonight. I guess we can start off with kind of the easy stuff if you want, and that would just be kind of I guess your story and how you came to be involved in special education.
Yeah, sure. So, in terms of how I actually got into special education, it's a little bit funny. I didn't really want to be an educator at first. My mother was a teacher, and when you're a teenager, you have that fear of becoming your mother. So I was like, I'm never going to be a teacher. Um, and then COVID happened, and I was kind of, I think, starved for interaction. So I I've interacted with kids in the past. I volunteered at, the elementary school I used to attend. So I was like, you know what? They had a vacancy. I applied as an assistant and I started and I was good at it. Um, like, which is a weird thing to say. But no, it was enjoyable. I took to it very well. And then when I got married, right, and came over to the States from Canada, they had a vacancy at the school right down the street from us. And I was like, you know what? Yeah, I'll just apply, see what happens. And then I got it, and as an assistant again. And then they asked me if I wanted to lead a classroom this year. And
Nice.
I am now leading our non-categorical class. So it's a branch of special education.
Nice. Wait, so did you went to school in Canada?
I did.
Sweet. I think you mentioned that when we were kind of doing all the prelim stuff, and that totally forgot about it. But that's awesome. So interesting. So you kind of fell into it and ended up kind of liking it. It sounds like.
Yes. And I think I have a bit of a familiarity with it. My brother is autistic, so it was kind of I don't have, I think, people see special education as a different animal, and to a degree it is, but I don't quite see it that way because I've kind of been involved with it forever.
Nice. Um, so did that sway your decision, or was it just a special education position that came up?
Um, no, so here's the thing. I don't think I consciously was thinking about it when I applied.
Gotcha.
But that being said, I do think, like, looking back, it did have an effect in the sense that non-cat, especially the position I'm in, if you are not involved with it, if you've never seen like things like autism, or you're not familiar with what it looks like, it can be daunting. And I think if I didn't have kind of background knowledge and have interacted with people on the spectrum, and for a variety of other disabilities as well, not just autism. But if I hadn't interacted with these people beforehand, I don't know if I would have been as, I'll say, excited to take over.
Might be a little overwhelming. Yeah. It's interesting you say that because my sister is also in special education, but when I was younger and still going to church regularly, our church actually had a special program for children with autism. At the time, our pastors son had autism, so they had this kind of special school for Sunday school for kids that had autism. So I was kind of exposed to it at a younger age as well. And then obviously my sister got into special education, and she works with a lot of autistic children. But it can be tough. I when I'm in public and you see I don't know the politically correct way to word this, but you see a particularly loud or outgoing autistic child, and for me, I can easily recognize that is someone with special needs. But I know a lot of people who have not been exposed to it are just kind of baffled, and you kind of get the the googly eyed people kind of looking at them and staring at them, and so I know that's a tough thing for people to deal with, I guess. Um, so I guess a follow up question would be, what in your type of special education or special education in general, what can dads kind of expect, I guess, when they kind of realize that that's a path they may need to take with one of their kids?
Sure. So I think kind of right off the bat, just to make sure that it's people kind of know what we're talking about generally, is kind of what special education is, because I think people have this kind of idea of it. Like they think it's a bunch of kids kind of shoved away into a classroom somewhere and forgotten about. That is not what it is, right? Granted, there are different settings, right, for different kids, but for the most part, right, special education, when we say special education, we are talking about the range of services, right, that are being provided. So special education is an umbrella term to help children with learning disabilities or other types of disabilities learn. So in terms of what you can expect from special education, that will depend on the disability itself a lot of the time. And in special education, generally in we call the general education setting, right? So in your regular elementary school, for instance, which is where I work. So I'll be talking a lot about elementary school because that's what I am most familiar with. But in terms of what you can expect, it would be basically the different types of services or supports. And that will look different depending on the child's IEP. So their individual education plan. And when that is honestly the biggest thing, when going into education, special education, and you're like, oh, my kid might need to be in special education. Yeah, get ready to hear the word IEP a lot. Or it might be different depending on whatever state you're in. Virginia, we call them IEP.
Yeah, as a husband of a special educator, I can tell you I hear the word IEP every day about 3,000 times. You know, and it's a well, I think we'll get into it, but it's an interesting it's a document that lasts for a year, right? And or however long, and it is basically laying out the child's education plan. And you know, like I said, we'll get into this, but I think really we should talk about the role of the parents in the IEP plan as we get into it.
Yes. And yeah, actually, that's a really good question to ask, because I think the idea, or it's frightening for a lot of parents in the sense that they don't know what their involvement is going to be with these things. And it's things like an IEP, where like, I don't know what that is, right? I don't know what that means. I don't know what that is. How do I engage with that? Do I have input in that? Like, what do I, as the parent, do? Right. Yeah. So in special education, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, and you might have been just about to do this, but it might be a good time to just briefly explain what the IEP is generally. And if you were about to do that, tell me to shut up, and I'll go sleep on the couch tonight.
No, I was just going to talk about parents in the IEP, but yeah, I love talking about it.
before we get to kind of what the IEP is, and what it means to students in a little more depth, um, I just thought of a question that we didn't really discuss kind of prior in our meeting, but what if you have a child in school and you're wondering if there's possibly a program, or if you think they may need some sort of special assistance in the education system, whatever it is, um, wh- who do you is their doctor someone they should maybe see first, or is there a counselor or someone specific at the school that can kind of help them understand,
So
what?
yeah,
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 go ahead.
yes is the answer.
Okay.
So depending on the disability, so as like educators, we can't diagnose a child,
Right.
right, ourselves. We can't say like, oh, this kid has autism, right? We can
Mhm.
say, right, that
You can
kid
suggest maybe,
seems
yeah.
to have some markers that suggest to me that he might be on the spectrum,
Mhm.
right? But we cannot diagnose.
Right.
That would happen outside. They'd probably go, depending on the age, to a like diagnostic pediatrician,
Mhm.
right? Somebody who could say for certain.
Right.
Um,
Provide a
yeah.
clinical, yeah.
That being said, if it's a learning disability, that's a little bit different, right? And things like autism are typically noticed, not all the time, typically,
Mhm.
right? Are noticed before they are in, or at least preschool, right? Either before they are in
So yeah,
school
I gotcha.
or just when they're starting, depending on kind of the severity or depending on um, whatever kind of social interactions they've had before, where you can things like you can see them and you
Mhm.
can be like, the milestones aren't quite matching up, right? For instance,
Right.
my mother knew my brother was autistic very early, much earlier than I think a lot of other parents do, because he and I were a year apart and she could see him with me
Yeah.
and see that the
So
milestones
it's
were
very
very,
contrasting type
yes. And she was
behaviors,
an
probably.
educator and she was like, we're gonna to get you tested.
Madeline,
But
maybe one thing to also say is that, or one thing to also, you mentioned this a minute ago about learning disabilities, and there might be some people out there who don't realize, and it could theoretically be different across the states, but who don't realize that learning disabilities also will be in the special education setting, and that there's varying degrees of learning disability and varying degrees of special education support for that,
yeah,
as that goes. So I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit, just because
sure.
I think that
I
that
will just say
distinction would be
really
helpful.
quick, just to make sure it doesn't get lost, because this is something people do ask, is in school, if we believe a child has a learning disability of some sort, like we think, oh, this child might be dyslexic, this child might have ADHD, like if it's something that we as a teacher see, we can, and parents can do this too for school age children, we can submit them for local screening, which is a process that they go through in order to kind of tell if they have this particular learning disability. Right. So within the school environment, you can anybody like related to this child in like within reason, right? So their teacher or their
Mhm.
parent can ask that this kid be screened, right, for whatever
Nice.
disability. I just want to make sure that that's out there. That at least in Virginia, um, that's how it works. We can suggest that, hey, we think so and so might have some markers that suggest this, or their test scores are suggesting to us that this might be a possibility. We would
Mhm.
like to get them screened, right? And then from there, parents will be guided through the process. Parents have to consent, right? It's not nothing else.
That's what I was gonna ask. I'm sure somebody would be
Behind
thinking
their
that in the
back,
back of
right?
their head.
It's parents are so like we nothing happens until the parents say so, right? The parents are
Yeah.
the ultimate decider. They are the ultimate um, power holder. They and nothing goes unless they say go, right?
Yep.
So they will be guided through the process. There's a lot of different steps. There's a lot of different
Mhm.
um, and ranges to it, but they will have somebody with them, normally from their school or
Yep.
from whatever program or whatever expert is helping them. There will be somebody to guide them through it.
That's awesome. Kind of
yeah.
like a liaison to at least
Yeah,
see if you're, if there's possibly something going on, because I know another concern will be for some parents, what about the costs, or parents that don't have healthcare insurance at all, or good healthcare coverage, right?
So
Because that stuff can get expensive quick.
For at least us, I don't know about private education. Yeah, I can't speak for that because I work in a public school. But
Mhm.
it is actually our duty, it is our like lawful duty to find children, like find them, but I mean to identify children with learning disabilities in
Mhm.
order to give them the support they need, and it is free, right? That is not something that will fall on the parents. So there's this child's getting screened. That is not something that the parent has to pay for. It is our job
Is
to get them identified and in order to get them the IEP that will grant them access.
is that screening? I know you mentioned earlier, obviously teachers are not physicians, so you can't provide any sort of diagnosis of anyone, but is that screening enough to get their child started on a special education journey, if that's what the screening deems is necessary?
Yeah.
Or is there still, like, they still need to follow up with their, I mean, obviously I would hope they would follow up with their physician, but is there another path they still need to keep going down on the private healthcare side to get them in the program?
It depends on, again, the disability. A lot of the time, the screening will get them eligible for special
Okay.
education. There are 13 sectors in which somebody can fall on the special education setting. If you fall underneath one of these 13 categories, you have access to special
Okay.
education. So
Sweet.
even if the screening does not give them the specific, right, disability, that might be something they need to go and see a actual like diagnostic physician, pediatrician, whoever they need to see. Um, it will probably put them under what we call specific learning disability, which is one of our categories. So a lot of my kids, non-cat kids, so non-categorical kids, fall under specific learning disability because their disability doesn't necessarily fall neatly into one of the other 12 categories, right?
Got it.
So
Mhm.
typically, if you're getting screened, they'll find a spot for you, right? Even if they don't know specifically what your disability is, a lot of the time that's reserved for children who have markers of autism, right? But you're not quite sure, they can't quite say that.
Mhm.
You'll probably fall under specific learning disability. But if it's things like dyslexia, ADHD, emotional disorder, they could probably get you nice and tucked away where it
Right.
won't be.
Yeah.
Um, sorry,
And,
and
and, s- and
Yeah.
keep it coming.
really quick, I want to talk about what Nick mentioned earlier about kids being in the gen ed setting. Because that is and when we say gen ed setting, we mean the general education setting.
Mhm.
That's their normal classroom, normal, with their non-disabled peers, right? So kids who do not have learning disabilities that are in general education.
Okay.
So we try to place any kid who has an IEP in what we call their least restrictive environment. And their least restrictive environment is not exactly like a place necessarily. It is, but the term refers more to like the principle um, that dictates that we make sure students are in their general education setting as much as possible with their, um, I want to say, like non-disabled peers. Right.
So
So
if they need I'm trying to digest that. So if they do need a little special assistance, whatever that may be, it's still possible for them to get that assistance while staying possibly with the general student base and a completely normal, I say normal, that's a bad word, in a completely general education classroom. Um, it sounds like you're saying that could be a possibility for
Yeah.
some students where they can still function in that kind of regular classroom environment.
Yeah, most students do, right?
Okay.
And that's the thing. And so sometimes it will depend on their needs, right? Where they are. Because sometimes it's not fair to the students. So some of my students, for instance, they socially can access general education, right? They can be there, they can interact with their peers, but they can't necessarily engage with the content, right? For whatever reason, that content is above what they are capable of at that time. And it can be frustrating, right? It's not necessarily fair to them to have them sit there and work on things that they cannot access yet.
Right.
So a lot of my kids for their gen ed time, right? They'll be there maybe for the core lesson, but for the most of their like language arts blocks or most of their math blocks, they'll be with me working on specific goals that they have that might not match what they're doing in class, but it's laying the groundwork so that they will eventually be able to access the content in the gen ed room. Other kids, my kids get pulled out a little bit more than the average special education kid because their needs are a little bit different or a little bit more intense. But generally, your regular, right, special education kid spends most of their day in their general education setting with the occasional pull out, is what we call it, the occasional pull out time.
Madeline, do you want to explain a pull out versus a push in?
Yes. So pull out is when a kid is taken like from the gen ed setting into the special education setting. So for my kids, right, when I'm pulling them out, I'm pulling them into my classroom. Right.
For those like core classes or whatever you had just kind of mentioned. Okay.
Yeah. Push in is when there is somebody in the classroom supporting those kids.
I did not know that existed. All right.
Yeah, my instructional assistant, right, she will do push in.
So she's kind of like an additional aid in the classroom, but specifically to assist whatever student. Okay. That's pretty sweet.
And they are allowed to help all the kids. I just want to say they are allowed to help all the kids, but
Nice.
primarily their job is to help our kids, right? So if my aide is going in there, my assistant, she is helping our kids, right? Just to make sure that they are doing okay. So a lot of the kids like my kids have a lot of pull-out hours, but they don't have a lot of push-in hours. Whereas some of my other teacher friends, a lot of their kids will have a lot more push-in hours as opposed to pull-out hours, depending on their kids' needs.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting also with the push in. I think Madeline last year when you were doing more push ins, you talked a lot about it's not only an opportunity to be there to help the kids in the gen ed setting, help them with their work or whatever they're doing, but also to observe their social cues, how they're interacting with others, how they're interacting in the gen ed setting, so that when you're developing their plan or their education plan, you can take those markers, take those cues that you're learning while you're doing the push-ins in that setting and apply them and plan for them and say, well, they need to work on this social interaction because I've seen them interacting with kids and they struggled in this environment, or they succeeded in this environment. They're really good at interacting in this situation. Or when they get frustrated with work, they run around the room, right? And that's their reaction to it, or they shut down or whatever it might be. And it's sometimes, I would imagine, difficult to see that in a pull-out special education setting where you have less room and you have to go into the gen ed setting where you're surrounded by 15, 20 kids and you can actually see that interaction.
Yeah, I will, it's been very different this year for me because primarily I was in the classroom. I was doing push-in last year and I was taking data, which is like our favorite thing is data, because that data, those things that you see and those things you're keeping track of will have an effect on what goes in the IEP, what you're telling parents, right? Like data. It's our favorite thing to talk about. So it's I was in there observing a lot of the time and helping whenever was needed. But this year I'm in my classroom. I don't leave my classroom. I do pull out. My kids come to me. And it's just been so different, so odd, because I don't know how they're behaving in their general education setting. So I have to really rely on, their general education teachers or some of the other special education, aides or teachers who happen to be there to do push-in, because I don't. It's very strange. It's a very weird adjustment for me, because I'm so used to having all the data that now I have to ask other people for it. And I'm like, would you say he was happy?
Yeah.
What was his mood?
So I'd like for you to, y'all briefly spoke of elaborating on what an IEP is.
Sorry, yes.
If you would please do that, that'll lead me on to my next question.
Sure. So any child who qualifies for special education will have an individual education program plan, IEP, right? Again, they have different acronyms for different states, I believe. Yeah. But for Virginia, it is IEP. I think IEP, and I don't know this for sure, I'm pretty sure IEP is generally the most common name. I think even in Canada, we call them IEPs as well. So basically what it is a formal plan that details all of the services and supports that the school or a school will provide to meet the unique needs of a student with that disability, right? Or it includes all of the specific instruction that they will receive, right? So on an IEP, you'll have things like details about each specific service and who will be performing those services, right? So like on my kids' IEPs, they'll talk about their pull-out times and like talk about how I will be, doing their pull-out. And it will break down how many minutes or hours per week that student will be in whichever setting or receiving these services. And minutes are like, we love minutes. We love doing the math on minutes and how long we can get kids to be in big settings.
Sorry to sidebar you, but who gets to write that plan? Is that someone like yourself, or is there a separate body of people that?
So the IEP, typically when they're first formulated, I will admit I have not been there for the initial conception of an IEP. Most of my IEPs that I have are continuations of IEPs. From what I understand, when they are initially conceived, right, it is teachers, administration, parents. I want to say that big capital.
Okay, so parents do get a little.
Parents are like one of the biggest parts of the IEP.
That was my concern. Is they get this wonderful IEP, but then they're kind of shocked by it or don't understand it because they weren't really involved in the process. But it sounds like it's the complete opposite of that. Yeah.
So unless there's odd situations. So for instance, we had an IEP today that we were amending, right, fixing because it was timed for its annual review. And we were supposed to do it a couple weeks ago, but the parent didn't show up. And we had it today, and the parent still didn't show up. Even though they had contacted us and we'll be there, but like both times, and then they didn't. But we were like, we have to at this point go ahead, otherwise his IEP will be out of compliance. So in very rare circumstances, we might. Now that being said, a pre-existing IEP, and we weren't like doing anything super crazy to it, right? So we were just like, we'll go ahead and we'll do whatever tweaks we want to do. We will send it home with the student, and then if they want to, make something different to it, we can have an amendment later on.
So is it kind of a fluid document throughout the school year, or once you set it for that year? Okay.
So typically they'll have IEPs. They'll have like a 3-year I don't want to say lifespan, but they get reviewed.
Okay.
Generally, once a year, and then they'll get kind of completely revamped if needed every 3 years.
But if you, as an educator, maybe identified a portion of it that wasn't working, it would be within your power to kind of tweak that and say, okay, maybe they need more pull out time or less, or
We would have to, we'd have to have a meeting.
right.
Like we can make those suggestions, but we would have to have a meeting with the parents
Okay.
and administrators and whoever else needs.
But for a parent who's maybe overwhelmed and trying to sort it out, if it's not the end of the world if they agree to the IEP and their student gets into it and realizes they need to, something needs to change.
So if typically when we have an IEP meeting, right, if the parent isn't sure right away, we will give them a copy, right, of this IEP that we discussed at the meeting. We're like, this is what we're thinking, this is what it look like. If the parent's not sure, we'll send them home with it, and we'll give them an opportunity
to digest it and sit
on their own, decide, and that they can consent, right? And they can sign it, because nothing happens until a parent consents. And in IEP meetings, it's not unusual for parents to have advocates, right? So if they feel like they aren't quite sure what's going on, you can have somebody come in and kind of advocate for you, but somebody who's more familiar with the setting and the terminology, and just somebody to kind of help you feel more secure.
Matt.
Right. Yeah. So it's more.
That's a good point, and I think you should finish your thought. But I just wanted to say, I also think it's worthwhile. You talked a lot about the minutes and what you do, but it's worthwhile to talk about a little bit about the goals for the student and what those kind of look like, and how those are incorporated into the IEP as well.
Yeah. So in the IEP, we will identify what we call areas of need, right? So if a child is struggling in math, right, that is an area of need for them, and they will have probably at least one goal. A lot of my kids have multiple goals, right, for their various areas of need. So each area of need will have kind of what we call like the annual goal, and that is kind of the big main goal that we are working on. And they might have like little sub goals to it or little objectives that are connected to it, but the annual goal is really the main thing that we're working on.
Right.
So depending on what specifically the area of need is, it could be adding and subtracting numbers within 20, right? Like little things, working on word problems, right? Identifying important information. A lot of our decoding goals, which are like reading, deal with like, can they look at consonant, vowel, consonant words, like CVC words? Can they decode multisyllabic words? Can they, like, a lot of their goals will be, can they read sight words, right? Like words that you see and like identify immediately, because it's more of a memory thing. So like the and is.
Are the goals only educational?
No. So they might have behavioral goals, right? Or they might have social skills goals. So a lot of my kids specifically, so a lot of the non-categorical kids tend to have behavioral goals. And when we say behavioral, I don't mean like, I think there's a kind of a stigma around that, where people assume that I mean this kid's trying to like destroy the room, this kid is like throwing things, this kid is like, no, typically not. A lot of the time it is like task avoidance. Okay. Right? It's like, can we get this kid to do the worksheet that we need them to do? Right. And his social skills goals are just kind of interacting with their peers, right? Or interacting with other people. So like one of my IEPs that I did today, right? We I suggested a social skills goal because I found that socially, this student struggled to engage with his same age peers, right? He was great with younger kids, really good with adults. Kids his own age, he avoided like the plague. Because he can't engage with them socially, right? And he doesn't know how to navigate that. So the point of the goal is to keep track, one, so that we can kind of get data, because when you don't have a goal, you don't track it. Right? So now that there is a goal in place, I can actually start tracking that and seeing what percentage of the time in the quarter. So when he is presented with an opportunity to engage with his peers, what percentage of those opportunities is he actually engaging? Right? And then when you have that, you can start to build off of that. Right? And you can start to see what are the where is it during unstructured peer time, like sort of cafeteria, recess, or is it structured time, like the general education setting that these kids are struggling, right? So yeah, not all goals are behavioral. It's wherever we see a need, right? And it is just anywhere. So it's like reading, communication. So that may be speech. So if there's a child who has like a speech impediment, they'll probably have a communication goal. We have kids who get occupational therapy because their motor skills are not super developed and they might need help with like legibility in their writing. They will have goals, right? So it's whatever this child's area of need is.
Okay. Well, thank you for providing some insight into the IEP. That's going to lead me into my next question. And it actually kind of, I didn't include IEP specifically into this question, but what are some of the most common disabilities, whether they be learning disabilities or physical challenges? Okay. Obviously, you'll have to have an IEP for each student. Now, with it can be a combination of learning disabilities or physical challenges that you experience in the classroom. Okay. With that, how do you tailor your methods of teaching to accommodate those needs? Because obviously, no one child is going to need the same specific care. So, in a classroom setting, you've obviously got more than one child. It's not a cookie cutter plan. So, how do you tailor that to effectively provide the attention to multiple students?
Yeah. Excellent question. So the first, yeah. The first part of that question is when you're asking what's most common. So in special education, we have two types of disabilities, in the sense that we have high incidence disabilities, which are common disabilities we see often. Things like ADHD, emotional disorders, or behavioral disorders, general learning disabilities, right, which is its own category. Mild intellectual disability, or maybe a speech or language disability. These are ones that we see common. They are high incidence. And then we have low incidence. So disabilities that are not encountered as often. So things like visual impairments, auditory impairments. So deaf children they are considered low incidence in the sense that they are not as common as somebody with ADHD. Traumatic brain injury is one that might be part of the low incidence category. Traumatic brain injury is a little bit of an interesting animal in the sense that the student, you might have met and encountered the student prior, right? It is a disability that they might not have been born with, right? So a lot of the times it's an accident of some sort, right? So you may have encountered a student who didn't have an IEP, and then something happens, and then they return to school, and now they do need an IEP for whatever reason. Then you have like physical disabilities and just general multiple disabilities. So you might have a kid who has like a combination of a bunch of different ones, which may be in terms of high incidence. So you might have a kid with ADHD and emotional disorder. That's not completely unusual, but you might have a child who has like a combination of things that are a little bit more uncommon. An interesting one, actually, there's been a bit of a discourse, is autism, because autism used to be considered a low incidence disability. A lot of the time, and a lot of the kind of literature, it still is described as one. But they are now, because the diagnoses are increasing, because we know what autism looks like now in not only male students, but in female students, which is a big one, because the markers are a lot different. Because we can recognize it more, it's starting to get diagnosed more. And now autism is starting to become a high incidence disability. So yeah, we have, so like more common ones, to fully answer your question, the more common ones are like ADHD, emotional disorders, learning disabilities. And all these ones that I'm describing are like different categories, right, of those 13 categories. But they're kind of like most common to least common.
Yeah, and then
yeah,
touching on the second part of that question, I just to reiterate for the listener, right, is how do you handle or how do you deal with the variety of the disability in the classroom, right? I mean, I think it's safe to say that you don't only have kids with ADHD, right? You have multiple students and they have a variety, a mixed bag of disabilities. So how do you handle that? How do you handle the interactions between the students, and how do you manage a lesson plan around the variety of disability there?
Yeah, so a lot of it, and I keep going back to it, my favorite thing is the IEP, right? That IEP is like our Bible, essentially, right? It is what we refer to for anything kind of regarding a student. While they might have different individual needs, right? If you're looking at their IEP when you're trying to plan a lesson for this particular kid, you are looking at their IEP and you are trying to plan for them. You're trying to provide whatever services they need. In terms of a classroom like mine, where I do have a lot of overlap between students and they have a lot of different needs, I try to locate common needs, right? While they might not have the same specific goal, right? Both two of my fifth graders might have a mathematics goal that is just similar enough that I can, sit them both down and have a lesson, right? And talk about it and go through it and then break off into smaller groups, right? And individually help them out. A lot of my younger kids, their goals might not be specifically tailored to academics yet. For instance, I have a kindergartner who has no academic goals yet because we don't know what his baseline is. He's not been in general education before, so we don't know what he needs to know. We don't know what he already knows. So for him, right, his interactions with his peers, I will try to kind of have him with one of my other students who will have like a social skills goal, right? Or will have a behavior goal that kind of matches something that he has already, right? So it's like different but same. So I'm trying to attend to their individual goals individually, while also trying to teach them together.
Mm-hmm.
Mine is a little bit different. My classroom is a little bit different than most other special education classrooms because my kids are there for majority of the day, for majority of their general education time, and my students span all grade levels, right? So I have a kindergartner and a second grader and like a fourth grader and two fifth graders. So that part for me is a little bit different. So what I am doing is going to look a lot different than somebody who has a room full of just sixth graders, right? Who get pulled out together. My room has a lot of overlapping kids with a lot of overlapping ages, and different ages and different needs, right? So it's just trying to identify what do we need to tackle individually, what can we tackle together, right? How can we help each other, essentially, right? Because if a kid has a social skills goal and another kid has a social skills goal, then they're helping each other, meet their goals by being together, if that makes sense.
In the vein of helping each other, Madeline, what is the best advice you can give parents, particularly dads, but parents generally as well, for a variety? If they think that their child might have special needs, or if their child is in special needs or a special needs class, what's your top three, maybe best advice?
So I guess first and foremost, right, the most important thing for a parent to, I guess they already know, right? They already know this, but it's different. Knowing it is different than feeling like you can act on it. You, as the parent, right, are your child's greatest advocate, right? You are their first teacher, right? You see behaviors that we do not see, right? You are with them way more than we are with, right? Like we can see things, but you see like everything, right? And in that vein, you have a voice, right? And in anything that we are doing, your voice is the most important voice. And I can segue that into dads, right? Which is dads can be involved. I think there is this idea, this kind of stereotype that it is moms who do everything, or moms are the ones who are more involved. I wouldn't say that's necessarily true, right? And I think a lot of the time, dads feel like they shouldn't be involved because they're like, oh, it's, why would we be, right? It's a mom thing, right? Like people don't expect us to be involved, or they don't want us to be involved. That's not true. Anybody can be involved. Like anyone's voice is important, right? Like you see things we don't, and your child, especially a child in special education, needs somebody who is always, in their corner. Because depending on where you go, right, different people might see things that you don't agree with, right? And it happens, right? So sometimes you'll have a child. We had this happen where parents wanted them to go to advanced autism, and the program lead who observed the child one time, who was having a very good day that day, he was very switched on, decided that she didn't think he needed to be in the special education program. And mom did not agree, rightfully so. None of the teachers who were with the student most of the time agreed. And because mom was so involved and so wanting to make sure that this child got the best support that they needed, we were eventually able to get that child into advanced autism, right? We got them observed again, which is, especially in our area, a little bit difficult to do because all of our advanced autisms are like very full. But it's like this. Yeah,
so within that, you have you talk about the parents need to be involved, but how available are you? And I don't mean put your phone number on podcasts. I mean hypothetically, as a theoretical teacher, how available are you for conversation, for meeting with the parents, for, just having a level set of like, this is why my kid does this, or this is the stuff we're seeing at home. Like, well, what's your availability? Are you willing to talk to parents outside of class? What is that like?
So typically on the day to day, I will use in Virginia. I don't know for sure if everywhere else uses it, but in our district, we use something called Talking Points, which is a program in which it's like Messenger. Honestly, it's like Facebook Messenger. It's very similar to that, where teachers can communicate directly to parents and vice versa. Um, so if something happens, right, mom can send me a message being like, hey, so and so had a bad day yesterday, so he might not be in a great mood. Just a heads up, or so and so forgot his coat yesterday. Do you think you could locate it? Like stuff like that, like little things. But it's I love talking points. I could talk about talking points forever. It's so nice to have. Because it's completely separate from anything else. So it's not like you're emailing. It's not like you're using your number. There's a little bit of anonymity there as well, in the sense that when I'm using talking points, it'll show me that there are 2 contacts for this student, right? But it won't tell me who I'm speaking to directly in that moment, right? So it's not like I know I'm talking to mom or I know I'm talking to dad. It'll just be like the parent. So I find sometimes that can help parents feel like they can ask questions or they can say things, because it's not like I'm forming like an opinion of the specific person. But no, like on the day to day, I'm very active on talking points. Most teachers are. Like most teachers check their talking points once a day, if not more. I'm always on it. I check it every once in a while. Um, in terms of meetings, it will depend on the schedule and it'll depend on the teacher. But most of the time, it's not difficult to schedule a conference with a teacher for any reason, especially via Zoom. Like in the day and age of virtual telecommunication, it is not hard. It is typically throughout the day. Maybe you might want to have a quick like little conversation at lunch about something, or you might want to discuss particular things that you've noticed with your student. You can get that set up with your teacher pretty easily. Emails are a great way, because even if your teacher isn't familiar with talking points or they're not comfortable with talking points, they know how to use an email. They can check it. They're checking it all the time. It is just, I don't know. It's easy.
So
it's
sorry,
gonna be scary
did I cut you off?
either. If we don't check our email, get something from a parent, and go, oh my god, right? It's just like, oh, okay.
So I like this journey we're kind of taking the listeners on, right? So we've started off where either a parent has identified some concerns or a teacher has, right? We've got our IEP, some sort of learning plan going. Our kids in the program. We're being as involved and informed as we can. And I think another big concern at this point, when kids are in the system, so to speak, or the special education program, you kind of hinted at it earlier about the stigma and people not understanding these disabilities and the behaviors that are associated with them. And I see a lot of dads asking how they deal, and this goes for every student, but I think sometimes it's more centered towards kids with special needs. But do you have any advice for a parent who their child may be being bullied due to their disability?
Yes. So sorry. A lot of the time, and it circles back again to, you are your child's biggest advocate, right? Where I guess the best way to put it, like in a way that is casual, just don't shut up.
Right.
Don't stop talking.
Mhm.
If in the sense that if you feel like something is happening and you are feeling like
Hmm.
things aren't being handled, just keep talking about it, right? Don't let it die. Just keep bringing it up over and over again, because while you might feel annoying, right, you might feel like, oh wow, I'm really being like the stereotypical
Mhm.
like parent here who's like, my child is whatever. Be that parent.
I
You are
yeah.
your kid's advocate.
I read that before, and it wasn't related to special education. It was literally related to it wasn't even bullying, but it was some other issue at school. And I feel like that's kind of a stigma as well. Is some parents just clam up and they don't want to be the squeaky wheel. They don't want to. They think they're bothering the teachers, but I mean honestly, Emerson's had small issues at school with a kid on the bus, and I reached out to his teacher, and she responded immediately. And that very next day, he mentioned to me that the kid was no longer sitting near him on the bus, which was great. And I I think any teacher, I've seen a lot of posts where people are saying, "Oh, the teacher's not doing anything, or the school's not doing anything." I always find that hard to believe, and that's not to say that there aren't teachers out there like that. But I'd like to believe in my mind's eye that 99.999% of teachers will go to bat for any kid in that situation, special needs or not. Um, and so when always read those posts, I'm like, talk. If the teacher's not doing it for you, then there are 9 million other people at the school, right, that you can contact as well. And I hope that's kind of what you're trying to say is if what you're saying is falling on deaf ears, then pursue it at some other level at the school or with some other sort of staff at the school.
Yeah. I think a big part too sometimes what I don't want to say like trips parents up. I don't know the right way to say that. Is they might not have an understanding of
Right.
what the procedures are,
Mhm.
right? Like procedurally, what happens when this occurs.
Right.
Like
How you can
this
escalate
kid
things and
hit my son. What do we do about that? Right? And they just might not be familiar with the procedure within the school, right? How are the administrators supposed to handle that?
Mm.
Because there are because people I think like to jump immediately to so and so. My son said so and so hit him. They should be suspended.
Yeah.
Right. We don't jump immediately to suspension. And that is something that if you have questions about, right, that is something you can reach out to your administrator.
Mhm.
Right. Because I promise you that the principal, the administrator, would much rather explain it to you, right, and talk you through it and make you feel comfortable than find out that you're feeling upset and ignored, because nobody wants to make a parent feel that way.
I think also within the special education setting, and Madeline maybe confirm this for me. If you're worried about bullying of your student, of your kid who's in special education, is getting some sort of mention of that in the IEP. And I don't mean to say bullying goal, right? That's not it. That's not necessarily what I mean, but like maybe a socialization goal that mentions that he has been bullied in the past. And the reason being for that, not only is it helping, it's a social goal and we're trying to help the kid grow socially, but that's a positive thing to do just generally. But it also is it's a 3-year plan. It's 3 years of letting his next teacher, if he has a different teacher, or letting the teachers that he interacts with know, hey, keep an eye out. Make sure that this kid's not being bullied. Make sure that, it's just a way of notifying them on a formal document that in the
Yeah,
past
so
we've had issues with it. Go for it.
Yeah, so when we write an IEP, things that are said during the meeting are recorded in the IEP typically, right? So if we call it like present level of performance, typically, so we'll ask like the IEP meeting I was in today, right? We'll ask the general education teacher, how is so and so doing currently? What is the present level of performance in your class? What are you seeing? What are you noticing? Then they will ask myself, right? That's a special education teacher. What are you seeing? What are you noticing? And then we will ask the parent. Today was an odd case because the parent was not present, but should the parent want to make an amendment, we will go through the same thing, right? And they can have their input, they can make notes, they can change. So we will ask them, right? What are you noticing? What are you seeing? At which point the parent can say, I am noticing that socially they're having issues, like with their peers, during unstructured time. I'm noticing that they're being ostracized, for whatever reason.
Right.
And that will be recorded in their IEP. Right. And then that might turn into a social skill school of some kind.
Makes sense. Well, I think we're coming close to the end. Last question I have is maybe not specifically on the school level, because I'm sure states have different resources available. Are there any resources near and dear to you that might help dads or parents navigate the special education system or anything like that?
Yes. So I would say check with your school, because again, state to state, they are different, right? What kind of resources are available, what different programs there are, that will vary, right? So I can't speak for everybody or anybody, right? But a website that I do have that I genuinely find very helpful for people who are kind of maybe new and don't understand, where it's like, what is the least restrictive environment? What does that mean? What is an IEP?
Mm-hmm.
Who gets an IEP? How is that different from whatever other plan? So there's a great website called understood.org that breaks things down really nicely, really concisely. It will give you like specific descriptions and definitions. It will tell you what are the categories underneath special education, right? What are those 13 categories? Mm-hmm. It will give you side-by-side comparisons of like an IEP versus like something like a 501 plan, right? Where it's like, who writes it? What's on it, right? Or what's parent involvement, right? It'll give you like all of these specific things, and it's really helpful. It will tell you what is special education. It's very beginner friendly. It's very user friendly. So if I had to pick one resource to kind of give parents like who are just kind of new to it and starting out and not quite sure where to begin, I would start there, because then at least you know what people are talking about, and when you're discussing things with the teacher, you're like, oh, because I think a lot of the time the language is scary because you don't know what that means, right? That'll at least give you a baseline.
Thank you. Well, we'll put a link to that when we release the episode. But listen, we really appreciate you coming on the show. Like I mentioned earlier, there are a ton of dads that are just kind of afloat in this sea of special education and special needs. And I really appreciate everything that you've had to share tonight. I think that's going to help a lot of dads kind of either get started on their journey or continue their journey with their kids. I appreciate what you do. I hear things all the time from my sister. I know it is not easy to be in a special needs setting and be a teacher. So appreciate what you do and the ways you help those kids kind of navigate the special education system. So again, thank you guys for hanging out on Time to Dad. If you have any additional comments, questions, concerns, leave a comment. We will try to get those to Madeline. I won't guarantee a response because we were already more than appreciative of the time she gave us tonight. But possibly a follow-up episode sometime if we need one. Thank you guys for hanging out. As always, check us out on the Facebook group, like and subscribe, and we will catch you on the next episode. See ya.